Hello and welcome to Fraud in the News. This is our third edition, and on this edition we're going to talk about a number of cryptocurrency related fraud stories that have been in the news recently and touch on a couple of European banking stories. And then afterwards, later in the episode, we will be discussing one type of unexpected fraud in Canada that has been on the decline. So submit your guesses in the comments if you feel so inclined as to what that fraud is, and we will let everyone know later. So on this edition, I am joined by Emily Primo. Emily, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Emily. I'm the associate editor of Fraud Magazine. I'm happy to join you on this episode.
And thanks for keeping me company. I'm Mason Wilder from the research department. I'm a research specialist, and if you've seen any of the prior ones, I've been here each time. So anyways, we'll just jump right into some of the cryptocurrency stories. Emily, you want to go ahead and start off?
Sure. The FBI recently issued an initial coin offering scam warning. But to give you a little bit of a refresher, if you aren't sure or don't remember what initial coin offerings are, or more commonly known as ICOs, they're used to raise, it's a cryptocurrency setup that are used to raise funds, typically for startups or businesses that are trying to generate excitement about their product or their scheme. And during an ICO, a company sells the underlying cryptocurrency to investors in exchange for other more established cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ether. By selling these tokens during a specially designated window, a company ensures that it has built-in user base for its eventual product. They've become really popular they were very popular a couple years ago. They've lost a little bit of steam because more scams and more fraudsters are using them nefariously. And so the FBI has outlined what it believes are consistent threads running through fraudulent initial coin offering schemes. And the key strategy of this scam that they're focusing on in particular is that there are misrepresentations of the director's professional experience. So with the ICO, they may say that the director has some sort of background that they don't necessarily have. They've engineered false impressions of how much traction the ICO has garnered in the industry. So they may say it's wildly popular or has taken off, but it really hasn't. And there are unrealistic promises of prospective returns on tokens, which I remember was a huge fear when ICOs first became popular, that they were making promises that they wouldn't be able to keep.
Yeah, a common theme across different frauds is if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But as part of that warning, did the FBI issue any kind of advice for consumers or investors?
They sure did. They warn investors to conduct due diligence on any scheme and the individuals behind it, and to be on the lookout for entities that appear to be exclusively internet-based, where a physical address or contact is hard or impossible to come by, kind of similarly to a shell company.
Right.
So, and the Bureau also suggested investors should be aware of which jurisdiction the offering is registered in, if at all, and to which laws and regulations it therefore falls subject to. So really do your due diligence if you're interested in investing in an initial coin offering.
And just very quickly, one good resource for things like that, in addition to just doing your basic Google searches, you can go to Corporation Wiki, which is a pretty good source for where companies are registered or who the directors are associated with the company. But anyways, speaking of cryptocurrency scams, one thing that's been popping up quite a bit in the news lately are SIM swapping schemes.
Say that 10 times fast.
Right, yeah. So if you're not familiar with what SIM swapping is, basically it involves fraudsters convincing telecommunications companies like excuse me, AT&T or T-Mobile to change the registered SIM associated with somebody's phone number to a new SIM card on a burner device that they have. And this basically allows them to bypass the multi-factor authentication that someone might have associated with their digital wallet where they keep their cryptocurrency. So victims in some of these cases have been individuals that have bragged or boasted on social media about how much Bitcoin they have, or whether they were an early investor in a successful cryptocurrency. That just kind of paints a target on them, and these fraudsters do some research on them to be able to maybe answer some security questions, and then do some social engineering with the phone company, basically. And in this case, a couple guys that have been indicted by the Northern California district attorneys, they gained control of their victims' cell phone numbers, but then also took it one step further and got access to some of their email accounts and other things, and even then extorted the victims. So not only did they steal cryptocurrency, but then I believe extorted these victims with, threats of compromising their other accounts or trying to get something out of them to get that access back.
So other than being aware of this specific type of scam, are there any other implications of this story for CFEs?
Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned, this is basically documented cases of multi-factor authentication being bypassed. So, multi-factor authentication is one of the fraud prevention or identity theft prevention strategies that people mention a lot, or first and foremost, and but it's not necessarily a silver bullet, and as this case shows, it doesn't even necessarily take a lot of technological sophistication to overcome it. This is just some kind of good old-fashioned social engineering, and just shows that a lot of times the human element is the weakest, and that's what fraudsters prey on.
Sure.
So and also, the FBI has been kind of making these SIM swapping schemes a priority, particularly in California, where there's so many tech investors and where a lot of these companies have started up. And so, but this goes to show that, U.S. authorities, including the FBI, are really taking cryptocurrency scams seriously, with not only the warning that you mentioned, but this kind of focus on SIM swapping, and even another story with the FBI.
Yeah, so the FBI actually wants your help to investigate 2.5 billion, the 2.5 billion crypto scam BitConnect. So to give you a little bit of background, in 2018, at the beginning of 2018, the open source cryptocurrency BitConnect started to see its demise, its eventual end, some would say. Thousands of investors were duped by the platform, which promised impressive returns. Like I mentioned in the first story, they made bold claims about the kinds of returns they could give to investors on a lending scheme using its own native token. And the concept was fairly simple. Investors would trade in Bitcoin in return for BitConnect coin, BCC, which they would then lend out at varying rates of return and interest. BitConnect's lending platform led to accusations of the platform being a Ponzi scheme, and which in time led to a cease and desist order issued by U.S. regulators. What further drove concerns around the legitimacy of the operation was the referral system and the anonymous ownership of the company, which you find with ICOs and cryptocurrencies. A lot of it is about anonymity, which in many ways is appealing to people investing or wanting to get into cryptocurrency. But in this case, when it comes to ownership, you kind of want to know who's running the show. And investors' worst fears were realized when the anonymous creators of the program sold their coins and made off with the reserves of BitConnect coin. leading to class action lawsuits and from a number of the affected investors. So the FBI, in doing their investigation, they've reached out to the public and they want help investigating this crypto scheme. They're looking to talk to people who were victimized by BitConnect, and they're publicly taking applications and information via the FBI website, and the agency will contact those it deems interesting enough to help with the investigation.
So if you were unfortunate enough to be a victim of that scam, please go reach out and give the FBI a hand. Emily, I know you've covered a lot of different cryptocurrency kind of things recently with the Fraud Magazine and the website for Fraud Magazine. It just kind of seems like there's a real high rate of fraud with a lot of these either ICOs or different cryptocurrencies. Why do you think that is?
I think a couple years ago when they first came on the scene, people were really excited about, like I mentioned, anonymity and the secure nature with which you could trade Bitcoin. But the problem is it's not regulated. The regulations that are being put in place, they haven't caught up with the technology. And so it's still kind of the wild, wild west. We're dealing with currencies that people are still figuring out, and fraudsters are preying on that vulnerability.
Yeah, and it just seems like these stories keep on popping up. Another one, this Canadian cryptocurrency exchange, Quadriga CX, which I probably mispronounced. Anyways, this is a Canadian cryptocurrency exchange that had between about $140 million to $260 million worth of investors' money tied up in different virtual currencies. There was, like so many other tech startup companies, there's this kind of wonderkind behind it, this 30-year-old CEO, Gerald Cotton. Well, in December, I believe, he's 30 years old, and he was reported deceased in India as he was helping set up an orphanage there. So the complication with this story is that he was apparently the only holder of the decryption keys that were necessary for customers to kind of access some of their digital wallets held by the cryptocurrency exchange. And as a result of his death, about 115,000 customers had their funds just frozen. They can't access it, and there was no backup or fail-safe with regards to the decryption keys. It was just all with him. And so after this story, there's been all kinds of questions about the source of funds that were tied up in cryptocurrencies on the exchange. Some cryptocurrency analysts that have taken a look at the different digital wallets and some of the transactions, which are part of a public record, have suggested that the exchange was operating like a Ponzi scheme, almost similar to BitConnect, where they were paying customer withdrawals out of new customer funds or new customer deposits. And then apparently after the CEO's reported death, several transactions occurred, which has got people kind of wondering whether or not he faked his own death. And of course, the internet detectives are out in full force on this one and pointing out how there's apparently a cottage industry in India revolving around fake death certificates, and the fact that it was kind of an untimely death for a young guy. So the skepticism has, resulted in a lot of uncertainty. Excuse me. And all this is kind of playing out in Canadian courts right now. And so that's going to be interesting to follow.
So aside from there's a lot of mystery and intrigue in this case with a fake death, but is there anything else that people should really keep an eye on?
Yeah, as you mentioned, this is just the whole cryptocurrency space at this point is pretty unregulated. And so you just got to be really careful in investing in it. And this will could be precedent setting in terms of how an asset recovery for a failed cryptocurrency exchange like BitConnect or this ends up playing out. Whether that's just a precedent for Canada or on a larger scale.
And definitely make sure you always have your key to the safe.
Right, yeah. Another just quick aspect of that story, he apparently didn't think through having a backup plan for the decryption keys, but he did put together a really detailed will about 2 weeks before his death, including plans for how to take care of his chihuahuas. So, anyways, that's our cryptocurrency portion of the program today, and we're gonna move on to European banking. I know we've touched on this in the prior episodes that we've had, and we've covered Danske Bank on the website and the blog, and we've got an upcoming story in the magazine involving Danske Bank, but they were recently ordered by Estonia to shut down operations in the country, which that's where their whole money laundering started, was their Estonian branch. That's where the scandal started. So anyways, they were ordered to shut down there, and not only did they do that, but they also announced plans to shut down operations in Russia and the other Baltic countries, Latvia and Lithuania. So we're continuing to see that scandal's consequences play out. It's potentially the biggest European money laundering scandal to date, and so keeping a close eye on that one, but the fallout continues from that. And there's also one of the countries where some of that's playing out is France, who also landed in the news recently with another big European bank fraud story.
Yeah, so on February 20th, just recently, a Paris court fined Swiss banking giant UBS 3.7 billion euros, which is about 4.2 billion US dollars, in a tax fraud case, which is a record for France. The bank was convicted of illegally helping French clients hide billions of euros from French tax authorities. The trial opened last autumn after 7 years of investigations. And they were launched when former employees came forward with claims of unlawful conduct. In the UBS case, French authorities determined that more than 10 billion euros had been kept from the eyes of their tax officials between 2004 and 2012. Now, I'm not as familiar with the banking industry. I am a little obsessed with cryptocurrency. So I'm going to give this one back to you. And if you could just give us a bigger picture outlook on European banks and kind of what's happening right now.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think in our first episode, I talked about Deutsche Bank being raided in Germany, this $230-something billion Danske Bank fraud has been going on. Now France is imposing a record fine on the Swiss bank, UBS, for, the other things were money laundering related. This is more tax evasion or tax avoidance. And so, from the Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, we're seeing a lot more illicit money flowing through these financial institutions. It even kind of goes back to years ago. HSBC was allegedly handling money from Mexican drug cartels. But these banks are being put under a lot more scrutiny, and some of these cases are actually turning into enforcement more often now, and it looks like it's going to continue. There's kind of a pan-European push for Magnitsky Act sanctions, similar to the act the U.S. put in place to sanction some of the Russian individuals that were involved with Bill Browder's attorney's death. And Bill Browder, if you don't know, he leads the hedge fund Hermitage Capital that was involved with a tax fraud scandal in Russia. He's going to be speaking at our annual conference. But
he'll be on the cover of the May-June issue of Fraud Magazine.
Right, and he has been showing up at a lot of anti-corruption summits and pushing European countries to punish some of the people that were involved in his kind of lawyer and associate Sergei Magnitsky's death. And so all of that is part of this bigger picture of some of these European financial institutions getting called to task for things like in this UBS case. This is stuff that happened as far back as 2004, and in the Danske Bank case as far back as 2007. So some of these cases take a while, but some of these chickens are coming home to roost, to use a bad proverb there. But anyways, so we expect to see more stories like this, and we're going to continue covering some of this stuff in the magazine and at our conference, and we expect to see it pop up in the news quite a bit more.
Sure.
And so now, if you stuck around with us to have that question about unexpected Canadian fraud answered, if we can have an imaginary drum roll, please.
Those of you who guessed which fraud is on the decline, sausage mislabeling in Canada is on the decline, y'all. Yes, I'm sure that's what everybody was guessing and was expecting us to talk about, but sausage mislabeling in Canada is down. Researchers found that mislabeling and cross-species contamination of meat ingredients in 14% of sausage samples selected from grocery stores across the country. That's down from their first ever study conducted by the same researchers over a year ago that revealed 20% mislabeling rate. What this means is that the researchers tested sausages labeled as beef, chicken, pork, or turkey, and they also tested the samples for sheep, goat, and horse. Unlike the previous study that uncovered horse meat in one pork sausage sample, researchers found no horse meat this time. And sausages labeled as single meat but containing more than one meat type contravene food labeling regulations. This is actually kind of a big deal for consumers who might have an allergy or, want to know what's in their food. Consumers may buy these products because of health issues such as allergies or lifestyle choices, or if they're avoiding pork. So that's good news for Canada and the sausage industry.
Right. Yeah. We, if you haven't joined us before, we try and finish off on a more lighthearted note. So that's some positive news. I know I find a lot of these food fraud stories a little bit hard to swallow, but at least this one wasn't a worst case scenario. And so thank you for joining us. We hope you found this edition stuffed with information that you can link to your own anti-fraud practices. And tune in next month. Thanks to Emily for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, please submit any questions or comments or any ideas for crazy fraud stories that we should talk about next month.